You're listening to Discography Discussion, episode 246, Antestor, hosted by Dan Terry.
Don't you want to see all your flaws in high definition like I get to see mine every week?
Geoff Kane.
No.
And Joseph Wren. I'd like to point out Dan is the one in this scenario who says drink less beer. Presented by discussmetal.com. And if your true Antestor is sealed in solid amber, then you are ready for this episode of Discography Discussion. I am Joe. That is Dan. That is Geoff.
Well, gentlemen.
So I got that amber in a little locket.
I mean,
in a necklace around my neck.
I don't have a locket, but it is the color of my energy.
Whoa,
right? Nah, we're just kidding. It's a secret 311 episode.
Not. Although I'd be fine doing it because I've seen I think I might have seen 311 more than I've seen any other band live.
I just want to get this right out of the way. I'm down to do a 311 episode anytime you guys want to.
Does any listener that is listening to the Antestor episode want us to talk about 311? If you do, send us an email, danandjoeshow@gmail.com. I'd be very interested to see how many people want that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about Omaha Styley all day long.
I'd prefer to talk about how ongoing and dirging these records are. They're so dark, melodic, and laid back, almost like the entire room is wet. It just doesn't feel clean when listening to these albums. But the atmosphere, we have a word for that around here, don't we, Geoff?
Yeah, it's moist.
There you go. So half the Antestor fans just turned off the podcast. Thank you for that, Geoff. You know, let's try to keep it clean, boys. We got some folks here that aren't your normal satanic, we love evil, every time you see a cross, let's turn that guy upside down. Antestor is a band that, you put the cross back in the right position.
No, I was gonna say if you turn the cross upside down on Antestor, they're just gonna take it, use it as a sword, and stab Satan in the heart.
Maybe they will. They're not really that kind of band. So let's talk about it for a second here.
All right.
Antestor, and this is I apologize. I'm an American man from the Midwest, and so I know I should be saying Antestor. I should be saying that every single time with that same inflection, but because I'm from the middle of America, I'm just going to say Antestor, and I just want to apologize, if that bothers you, because you're going to hear it a whole bunch of times.
Quick, Dan, say farty far.
44. I'm not from the coast. I'm not like the cars in the yard on Cape Cod. Yes.
People just west of St. Louis are known for saying farty far, like they're from Fargo.
Or what about Missouri? I never understood that one.
Yeah.
It's clearly an I at the end of Missouri. Anyway.
Yeah, just like you're supposed to use the S in Illinois. Yeah.
Everybody's like, shut up and talk about Antestor.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
The thing is that like this band is not like Horde, I guess, if there's any other way to put that. We were talking before we started recording about how these guys largely started what people like to call the unblack movement. And I'm the kind of guy that just I've just never liked the word unblack. I know it's like the word that you use when you're talking about like quote unquote Christian death metal. I'm sorry, Christian black metal. And you might want to do a record scratch on that one, Joe. When you're talking about Christian black metal, there are black metal fans that say, well, no, black metal by its very nature is evil. Therefore, calling it Christian black metal would be like calling it Christian satanic metal. And even the guy that coined the term unblack, Mr. Jason Sherlock, even him and I talked about it when I interviewed him on the Brutally Speaking podcast a while back. He said, yeah, you can't really call it Christian black metal though, because it just sounds stupid. But in my opinion, calling it unblack is equally stupid. Like I don't know. That's just my opinion. I know a lot of people call it that, but I just feel like we need a new word for it.
Or maybe we
don't.
Despite how technically silly it is, it's identifying. When you say the word unblack metal to me, I know exactly what you're talking about. You're talking about a black metal band for Jesus. And back in the day, that's what a lot of people wanted. It was like a game. How absurd of a description could you insert into your band's genre? It became a competition of sorts, and just hearing you give that explanation in the beginning of the episode, it's 20 years in the past, guys. It's 2003. Dan is on godcore.com right now. What's the longest genre? Let's find out. Dan, can you remember what it was?
Oh God, I don't even remember.
They got pretty absurd back in the day.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many weird variants to this. I went through an entire period of my life where I only listened to like unblack metal, and stuff like that, like the most underground stuff. Like I killed Joe's ears. I'd be like, listen to this, and I'd make him sit down in my car, and I'd pop something in, and I would turn it all the way up, even though it sounded like it was recorded on like a Tonka tape recorder.
Yeah, because it was like a 4th gen bootleg recording.
At 128 kilobits.
Yeah, so I even ripped it in lower quality than I probably should have.
That's funny.
And like to get some of these bands' albums back in the day, you basically had to like find the band on like, I don't know, like MySpace, or even like older than that, like be part of some unblack metal like message board. And like every dude on those message boards was an unblack band, i.e. like they recorded all of their own instruments, programmed the drums, threw down some sweet Casio keyboard licks, and screamed like a dying calf into a toy microphone. And that was, for the longest time, that was unblack metal. And like, I'm not going to lie, some of those bands were pretty rad, but most of them were not. If I can, there's another band we're going to talk about that I think is pretty rad, that not everybody else probably thinks is pretty rad. But we'll get to that, on a different episode.
Yeah, I do want to say this real quick. The one thing that I do like, and it's actually what I actually really enjoy about Christian metal in general, is taking something that's a negative and turning it on its ear and using it as a positive. To me, that's like really, really cool. Like when you can take something, that's how, like whenever somebody's bullying you when you're a kid, and they're talking about, oh, you're a nerd, you got straight A's. I'm like, yeah. And I'm going to go to college and I'm going to get a degree and you're going to go work at Burger King. I mean, it's stuff like that. Like obviously that's considerably more vain, but I'm just trying to give an example of why I like it. It kind of gives it a special kind of energy. I don't know what it is for me. I don't necessarily, go out of my way to listen to Christian metal. It seems like Christian metal finds me. And that's even before I started hanging out with, you guys. It's because there's a lot of that, I always feed off emotion when I'm listening to music. And for whatever reason, there's just like a special, I don't like an extra pull at the strings in your soul when I'm listening to a lot of Christian metal. Now there's good and bad Christian metal. I mean, there's good and bad metal. I think the ratio of good to bad bands, if you're looking purely at the percentage, is about the same of good bands versus bad bands. Yeah, but I mean, I guess at the end of the day, I'm more inclined to listen to Living Sacrifice than their secular counterparts, for example.
So you're saying the stigma of the music being bad because it has this word in the title, it feels good to see that get eliminated most of the time.
Yeah, I mean, they're using it for something that's good instead of, putting something else down. They're just taking it and saying, this is who I am and this is, what we believe. And it's, it's so bizarre because I know so many people get on me about my, looking at me from a political aspect, and I don't like political things in my music. But here I am talking about how I like Christian metal, and I like religion in my music. And that's because it's, for me, it's an emotional connection. That's what makes it better for me. Because it doesn't have to be, Christian metal. I mean, it could be anything. Like music that has a religious aspect to it seems to have a special pull for me. Whether it's hymns or chants or metal or anything. It's just a different pull for me. It's kind of it piques my interest a little more. This is another band that falls right into that I think these guys are fan-freaking-tastic. The fact that I hadn't listened to them much, and it is hard to get their music, to me is actually a bummer, because I think these guys are amazing.
Well, allow me to be devil's advocate here, and then I promise, guys, we'll start talking about the albums. But I'll be devil's advocate here. When you say it's something that's more positive, I guess it depends on your point of view, because for a lot of people, religion is not a positive sort of thing. And I think that's where, some of the more like the general black metal bands are gonna have a problem with this, because this was their rebellion, and in their eyes it's a whole bunch of dudes that just stole what they were doing and tried to turn it around and make it more socially acceptable. And so I can understand that perspective. If you look at some of the mindsets behind some of the earliest black metal bands, this was their religion. I mean, this was in a certain sense their religion.
The religion, right? No, I got you.
Or the pagan roots, and wanting, because in other countries, and also even in America, Christianity kind of just came through like a wave and just wiped out people's cultures and their religious practices and their religious beliefs and things like that. And so I understand why there's something of a kind of a war, that is perceived. I think it's more perceived on the Christian band sides, though, because they've got kind of a persecution complex. And the only reason I'm saying this is because some of the Christian bands that played the style of black metal, I guess is the most politically correct way of saying it, is like their bands like Antestor, that they actually write real music that has like real emotion behind it, and there's more to it than just like, hey, we're a Christian band. They're a band that has Christian beliefs, but is also just like a great band.
Yeah. Well,
general.
I guess maybe I should state it as it's the zealousness of it. Like, I love Heilung, and that is talking about like pagan roots and stuff like that. And it's all about, the Germanic and Norse history that's like kind of weaved into their music. They use traditional instruments. It's the sincerity and the zealousness of it that pulls me in. And it's part of why there were certain parts of punk that I didn't like as well. I'm never anti anything. So whenever somebody takes an anti stance, it bothers me a little more, and it kind of causes a disconnect for me. I'm about being inclusivity. That's more my thing. I want everybody to be together and happy and be able to share all of this. So whenever you're distributing hate, I don't like it. I don't like the hate. I hate the
That's
hate.
Fair. But
I mean, I guess that's probably the best way for me to put it.
I think the point that I'm getting at, though, with the whole unblack thing, is that there are bands like Antestor that are like a legitimate like expression of belief and musicality. But then there's a whole bunch of the other in the black metal scene that I kind of dealt with whenever I was younger, or the unblack scene that I dealt with when I was younger, was that a lot of those guys turned out to be just as elitist and hateful as their black metal counterparts. Like they delved too deep. They got so black metal that you'd have an album called like Satanic Rebellions Crushed and Satan Beheaded, and like it just became like it became more anti-Satan than it was Christian music, if that makes sense. And there is a difference.
That's when you get to that point, you really do. You're right. You become a mockery of yourself.
Yeah, and that's why it's hard for like black metal fans to take bands seriously. And the entire point of this conversation is that's how bands like Antestor will get overlooked, because they can get kind of lumped in with that scene. It's like a guilty by association sort of thing.
I gotcha.
Whereas you've got bands like Crimson Moonlight and Antestor, and like you mentioned, like Living Sacrifice, and some of these bands that were trying to do this sincere thing, and then it was everything that kind of cropped up around that became a problem. And all of that was really just to say is Antestor's not like that, man.
Yeah. 2 days later, Dan and Geoff finally shut up.
Well, before Dan and his cassettes subject Geoff and I to some old times cruelty, I'm going to take this time to say thank you to everyone for listening to the podcast. Thank you for listening and for subscribing. If you are not a subscriber, then you can find everything Discography Discussion at discussmetal.com. We are on Spotify, Apple and Google Podcasts, TuneIn Radio, Stitcher, iHeartRadio. So if you have an Amazon Echo or a Google Home, you have no excuse. Ask it to play the latest episode of the Discography Discussion podcast, and it will. We're also on Facebook and on Twitter at Discuss Metal. Be sure to like, favorite, and subscribe. It really helps us out. It lets us know you're listening, and now Dan is going to tell us all about 5-star reviews.
We do enjoy our 5-star reviews here on Discography Discussion. Every time we get one, we will read one on the show, even if it's not 5 stars. Just, I don't know, throw me some stars. Throw me 1 star, throw me 5 stars. Throw me some stars, and if I dodge them, I'll read them on the show. That was a ninja joke.
Cheesy.
And I would like to take a minute to shout out our beloved patrons, the people that support us financially and really in a lot of ways are the reason we're still doing this. They've supported us far beyond anything that I would have ever expected. And for that, I appreciate them. Who are they? Well, they are Lost Fiction, Kyle Driver, Timu. I'm sorry, I just can't. I can't do your last name justice. So I'm just gonna say Timu. I appreciate you. Dangerous Dave, Ryan Rowe, Richard Renz, Big T, Brandon Miranda, Ken Zapla, Tantalize Fungins,
Best name ever.
Jeremy Prince, Josh Moser, David Brown, Samuel Woodward, Brian the Dean, It's Me, comma, Brave, Lance Allagood,
The King of Metal.
Alexander, Patrick Asplund, and Jeffrey De Los Santos.
The actual Mac.
Thank you guys so much for your contributions every month. We appreciate you. And, we really appreciate our Patreon subscribers. But we also appreciate you guys too to listen to the episodes. And we don't ever want you guys to feel like you have to give us money to enjoy the show. You can always leave us a review, send us a message, send us an attaboy. Send us a message saying you want us to quit after that whole unblack discussion. Just let us know. We're here and we're receptive. We try to respond to everything that gets sent our way, so don't be shy.
So Dan, tell me about Antestor.
Oh man. Okay. Antestor is a Norwegian. I'm just gonna say what all the band bios say. They are a Norwegian unblack band formed in 1990. They are one of the earliest examples that I can think of like Christian extreme metal. I mean, that's kind of ignoring like all the 80s bands. You had like all of that stuff, but like they're basically credited for starting the European Christian black metal scene. They even had a release on Cacophonous Records, which is, notable for bands like Dimmu Borgir and Cradle of Filth. And so like they were in it, like for this Christian band to have kind of slipped into that sort of world was very notable. And they did that by just being a great band and not being really a parody of anything. When people talk about Christian music, they always like to say, oh, well, they're just the Christian version of X band. I can't think of any other band that sounds like Antestor, especially not in black metal and definitely not in the like kind of death doom origin that they sort of had. They were wholly unique. The band actually calls themselves sorrow metal. And I think that's actually a pretty apt description considering the fact that they are very sad most of the time. Until we like start getting later on into their discography and they start getting significantly more aggressive. But the early stuff is just this sad, dreary sort of existence with like a little bit of hope at the end of the tunnel. And I think that they do that style better than anybody else does that style. It's the right mix of hope and absolute depression. And they came out pretty aggressive. Their first demo was called I believe their first demo was called The Defeat of Satan, and then they had another demo that was released after that called Despair. And so The Defeat of Satan was more of a, and I'm going to talk about this real quick because their first two demos were actually re-released as a compilation album in 2003 called The Defeat of Satan. They stuck with the cooler title.
Good choice.
Yeah. And I like talking about that because I heard it, a few years after I'd heard Return of the Black Death. And I thought it was cool because it's not really black metal at all. It's more like death doom with like some keyboards. So like, like Geoff music. It's so good. It's so good. The lyrics are kind of cheesy. However, this is early 90s European metal. It's not the fact that they were a Christian band that made their lyrics cheesy. It was just that these dudes are going to sit down and write some serious, death doom metal right now. And we're going to throw some keyboards over and it's going to be super, super cool. And they would get much, much more complex as they went on. They're one of the most important bands in this scene. They're a band that like, if you go, into a Christian metal forum and you say, hey, I want to hear a Christian extreme metal band, everybody's first going to say Mortification. But if they don't say Mortification and, they actually listen to good music, they'll say Antestor. I'm just kidding. Mortification's fine. I'm listening to I'm wearing a Mortification hat right now.
Don't forget the coffee mug.
Yeah, I got that too.
I always underestimate how much black metal bands can be a breath of fresh air. The genre descriptors, the words that we use to describe what type of music we're listening to, sometimes they get misused. People say Opeth, they think death metal. Yes, at some point that was true, but was it really?
Not really. It was prog metal with Cookie Monster vocals.
So when I'm listening to Antestor, it's the almost complete opposite of the type of bands I listen to on a daily basis, but the genre doesn't really change. So it's the fall. It was Halloween a week ago, and this had the same kind of fall to winter vibe. It has that feeling of darkness and trying to make you a little uncomfortable in places. But if anything, I would describe the feeling listening to this band. It's similar to a band like Ghost, where I know it's not trying to be the greatest thing ever, but it's trying to use sounds to make me feel more comfortable than I should when I'm listening to the music that is behind it.
When you said you think of this as like a breath of fresh air, the first thing I started thinking of was like fall, and it's like the first like wintry mix, and the leaves are rotting, and there's mushrooms, and it's just, you know, that stale, like spore-filled air. That's kind of what I think of. And then the whole, like, they're embracing that, and that's mainly because you got to have all of that before you can grow something. That's kind of how I look at it. And so I actually really, I like these guys way more than I thought they would. I thought I would, because this is one that I didn't, this is one of the few times where I can say, yep, I don't know much about them going in, and really, really like it. Most of the time when I go in, even though I like, you know, bands that kind of branch out, when I the first go around, when I listen to a fresh listen to a new band, I kind of give them a poo-poo, you know, a thumbs down right off the get-go. And I was like, I gotta listen to you more to improve upon what my perception is of you. And I did not have that feeling at all with these guys. I could tell, like the first album that they came out with, 1994, I could tell that, you know, production wasn't there yet. You could definitely hear the chops. The chops were definitely there. The vocalist was okay, not great. I actually like the second the harsh vocals better. The second vocalist, but that's just me. And Dan already knows that which one's my favorite album, so I can't really say anything on that.
Geoff is going chronological on this discography, not necessarily in the order of official release. Can I say that?
You can say whatever you want, Joe. You edit the podcast.
But no, Joe's right. I mean, that's exactly how it is. I mean, one was we have an album that was released in 94 that got leaked in, what was it, like 97? The different company like pressed 50 albums, and then a ton illegally, and a ton of bootlegs kind of spawned out of that, and kind of like made this huge underground vibe for these guys. And so people really started paying attention. And but yeah, it was a good album. Just production quality needed some help.
Geoff really wants to talk about Martyrium, 1994, 97, 99, 2000. I think this album was re-released multiple times.
Yeah, it's fine. Martyrium. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought Geoff was going to talk, but that's fine. I'm going to anyway.
Talk? Okay.
Oh no, yeah, I'm talking now. No, you lost it. There was a whole pause.
First recorded, second released.
I didn't hear Martyrium until I heard their later stuff. So I went into it being like, all right, here we go. Another black metal classic from the boys in Norway. And that's not what I got at all. I got this like slower kind of doom metal album. Although I will say that there are elements of black metal, or at least like roots of black metal in Martyrium. And honestly, like, I think the vocals are superb on this record. They are so deep and absolutely abrasive. It's like they're very dense. They're very dense vocals. And I love it. I love how deep they are. I love how cutting they are. And I like how easy the dude actually is to understand. Even though you're saying the production quality isn't quite there yet. For an early 90s release by a Christian heavy band from Norway, you know, this sounds really, really, really good. It doesn't sound as bad as like a Christian metal band from Indonesia would sound, around the same time. But again, we'll talk about that later. This is one of those, like, really good. We talked about this in the Crimson Moonlight episode too, that like these guys kind of showed up on the level already. They had good enough. And yeah, it's not stellar production because some of their later stuff sounds really good, but this is like good enough to where you'd listen to it and you'd feel really justified if you're an underground metal fan. This is full of haunting, just oppressive riffs and atmosphere. It's not doom metal in the sense of like you're going to fall asleep listening to it. It's driving enough. I think there's actually a lot of diversity in the songwriting on this record where they'll kind of put you to sleep with like a kind of a pretty like melodic section, and then they'll move into like these kind of driving like power riffs. And I think that the riffs are kind of basic. They're absolutely not as basic as they were on the Defeat of Satan. They're much more complicated, but like overall they just kind of chunk away at their own pace, and that actually drives the atmosphere of the record home. I love the little tiny bits of black metal sort of sounding melodies that are in some of these songs too, usually in the intros. You can tell almost every song on Martyrium apart just because there's like a different, almost black metal-ish sort of melody playing at the very beginning of it. And then it kind of goes more into those like power riffs.
I truly got some Black Sabbath vibes listening to this record. I think there's an alternate timeline or an alternate universe where heavy metal didn't change the way it did in the 70s with Judas Priest and the Motorhead influenced bands of the 80s and the 90s. I could see everyone locking into Black Sabbath, and then 20 years later, this is what metal would sound like. I could see how you would take that blues influenced diminished style and turn it into this, because it wasn't afraid to play slow, but the atmosphere is there. The idea is there to create this reverb saturated sound space. It's like you're standing on a cabin porch in the middle of a snowstorm and there's no end in sight. And this record just brings you down. This is how you're going to feel for the next 45 minutes.
Oh, yeah. I mean, so I'm not the only one that listens to this band and like imagines being in a different place.
Absolutely not.
But like being in a different time, even a different season. I mean, it matches up pretty well now because it's in the fall, which is kind of why I chose this band for this sort of time period. But yeah, this is like you're going on a walk in the wintertime or even in the colder, autumn, and you're depressed, you're down about something. Speaking of depressed, did you guys hear the song Depressed? Because that song is incredible. It had the opening lyrics for that song, and they're actually sung. They're like clean sung by like a very even the clean vocals sound depressed. Like they're not trying to sound like anything polished or anything that like would make you feel good hearing it. And he just like in this kind of deeper register, he's just like fighting seems so in vain, weakened by my own brain. And it's just like that's pretty deep. This is not the Jesus that people probably think that they're going to hear from this band. It's very being depressed, not even being angry at anybody about it because it's your fault and like you're dealing with it. And those themes are going to follow this band throughout their career. But yeah, Depressed is probably my favorite song on the record. Yeah,
it's because I think they're realists and not preachy. I think that's an important part. And you're right. It's actually shockingly easy to understand what the dude's saying, which is kind of unusual for me to actually pay attention to that. But it's actually because it's easy to understand what he's saying, which that doesn't normally happen with this type of band.
The song Thoughts is really good too. Even though it's 7 minutes, just bear with me. It's a great song. Normally I don't like stuff like that. I mean, Martyrium's not afraid to mess with him. There's like at least like four songs that are above the 6 minute mark, and you don't really notice it. You get locked in with this album, and it's a great. If it's the first album you've ever heard by this band, it's a great start. If you started with the Defeat of Satan, you might find that one to get a little bit boring at times, whereas Martyrium kind of has developed from those kind of demo tracks to really pull the songs together in a way that works.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you think, oh yeah, wow, they were really good out of the gates, and then you realize, no, they had been around for a long time, toiled for 4 years. This track was hidden for several years. They had multiple demos, before this. So by the time that this record does come out, they have an idea of what it is that they're looking to do. And I think that's part of why it's such a good, like, quote unquote, first album, is because they already have kind of figured out a direction that they're wanting to go with it. And I think they do a really good job of driving the point home. And that's pretty, you think of it as unusual, then you realize until these guys did already put in a lot of blood, sweat, and tears before this even came out. I mean, even before it was recorded, let alone it came out, because it came out technically several years later.
Yeah, like it hadn't been unveiled to people. And I think it's a really important part of the puzzle, because if you start with the next record, Return of the Black Death, it's definitely it makes sense where this came from, because Return of the Black Death is, in my opinion, so on the level for black metal that I just couldn't see a band like that being their debut album.
1998.
Yeah, this was like a light years better, in my opinion. This was actually the first album I listened to because I couldn't. Martyrium was not available on YouTube Music, and this was, so I thought this was the first one. And
surprise, Geoff.
Oh, yeah. Well, number one, I mean, I was able to understand. I kind of did some hunting and pecking, and I realized how much of a year's difference there actually was between Return of the Black Death and Martyrium. So this album, like, it blew me away the first time I heard it. I was like, holy shit, or poop. Whatever we want to say, it was surprising, it was amazing, and I was hooked. And like I said, I was not expecting that when it comes to, number one, I'm not a huge black metal fan normally, but for whatever reason, it just kind of rubbed me the right way. And I didn't even know going in that this was a Christian band. I just was like, okay, it's a black metal band that Dan likes because he has his black metal moods. And it, like Dan said, this is a very good time of the season for black metal in the northern hemisphere if you're not close to the equator. This was wow. I mean, I don't know what else to say. I was impressed right off the get-go, and it was a very easy second, third, and fourth listen for me, because I normally try to listen to all the albums at least 4 times. And so yeah, easy listen, and that doesn't always happen to be the case when it's a band that I've never heard before for this.
When I'm listening to really good black metal, it sounds like the dark parts of a really good classical score. And now you're going to throw these throat-shredded vocals over the top of it, play some double bass. You can't feel good when you're listening to it, but there are so many other bands and records that try to make you feel worse than this one does. It's like it hits the nail on the head of what it feels like, to pardon the pun from the previous record. This is what depression sounds like to some people. And I think that's very effective, because it's not pushing you feel bad now because I have this recording of a chainsaw slicing people in two. Tony Danza, shout out to you and your electric boogaloo. This is, if you sit on your porch right now and stare out at the woods and the snow is coming down and the moon is full, how do you feel? Did I mention it's cold outside? You feel like this, right?
When I'm depressed, there's 2 records that I listen to. And I wouldn't recommend anybody else do this, because this by no means is me saying that listening to these records cures my depression. They literally just help me perpetuate it, I guess. I don't know. But there's 2 records to listen to. One of them is Transylvanian Hunger, and the other one is The Return of the Black Death, a record that for some reason I can't seem to say the name of correctly tonight. The Return of the Black Death is a very unique case of a record that was recorded to sound lo-fi, because that was kind of the direction that black metal bands wanted. But it's not so lo-fi that it's unlistenable, but it sounds primitive in a really good way. The instrumentation, except for the keyboards are like front and center on this thing, and they carry through a lot of it. And it's mostly just like tremolo melodies and throat shredding screams, but it's all done in such a, I don't know, like reduced aggression, reduced aggression. Is that a thing? Where it's
it is
just
with the right medication.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, I guess like one of the biggest things that people don't like about metal is that it sounds like people crying out in anger constantly. And the Return of the Black Death sounds like somebody crying out in pain, but nobody's coming to help them, you know? That's what this record does for me. And I remember, I have a funny story with this record is I actually did drive through a snowstorm while listening to this entire record. And that's an experience I'm never going to forget because it completely solidified everything about this record into one experience. Me and my buddy Mike, who was on the Opeth episode, we were driving. We had band practice for our old band, and we were driving down to our drummer's house, which is about a 48-minute drive, and he lives out in the boonies. He lives out where Geoff comes from, and so it was like it started snowing, and they said, people were like, maybe you should just leave your gear, at this place or whatever, and don't take it back to his house. And I remember I was Dan Terry, so I was like, no, it's fine. It ain't gonna be that bad. We'll just get in there, we'll dump our gear, and then we'll leave. It got really bad really fast. And we were driving, like we're driving on the highway, and it's like packed snow on the drive on the highway, and we're driving like real slow, like maybe 10 miles an hour, 15 miles an hour in little spurts, just to keep going. And the entire time the snow's still coming down. And me and Mike, you'd think we'd be upset about it, but we weren't, because we were listening to Sorg, and we were like really getting into it. And I think we were listening to Mike's copy of the CD. I finally did get a copy of this on CD, but it can be hard to find. Mike had to eBay it, and then years later I also had to eBay it. It's very hard to get a physical copy of, unless you buy the re-release of Kong's Blood, which you can buy from gotta remember where you can buy that from. Sorry, now it's really bothering me who did the re-release.
Look it up, dude. You're sitting in front of a computer.
Right.
Pardon me for breaking the awesomely depressive mood of that conversation, but just pull up a fucking computer.
It was going great until I couldn't remember the who re-released it. Kong's Blood. Nordic Mission. It was Nordic Mission. Okay, I'm gonna pick it up.
Do it.
Unless, of course, you bought the most recent re-release of the album, where they called it Kong's Blood, which was supposed to be the original name of the album, and that you can buy that on. You can buy that at. I already lost it. God, I'm so stupid. Is this important? Is it important to the story? No. Or unless you bought the re-release that came out a couple years ago. But that experience absolutely changed how I viewed this album, because the first time I heard it, I'm not gonna lie, I didn't get it, because I was still kind of young and didn't really understand what black metal kind of even was. But I was a young Christian kid, and there were some dudes that I was friends with online that were like, no, this Antestor album it's going to change your life. And it didn't. The first time I heard it. But it wasn't really until going through that experience that I was like, okay, I get it now, because I was worried and I was stressed out and a little nervous, and it's depressing to be out in the snow anyway. It psychologically affects you a little bit. And that whole experience put this album in perspective for me. And now it's one of my go-to albums. Like if I'm feeling down or whatever, I don't know, in a strange way, it kind of quantifies it, but there's light at the end of the tunnel, if that makes sense. Then they do a lot of really good on recording atmosphere. Like you hear a fire burning, you're cold and you start feeling hearing a fire burning. And if you're sitting there listening to it in your bedroom or something, you'll actually start to feel warm after hearing it. It's a really unique experience.
No, I get what you're saying. I have an album that's like that. I mean, it's more doomy, mellow death kind of stuff, but Ghost Brigade's for One with the Storm, it is a really depressing album, but for whatever reason it kind of helps me bottom out and then bring myself back up and plateau and even just even keel. It does the exact same thing for me, so I totally get what you're saying. It's a different type of music it's a different type of metal that does it for me, but I totally get the vibe and the emotion that you're talking of, on where something that most people would listen to that and go, wow, that's really depressing. And you're like, it is, but I can still see the beauty in it, and I can still relate with it, and it touches my soul, and it makes me feel better because of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, totally.
And I totally get what you're saying on that, because that's exactly that's how I am with Ghost Brigade. Actually with multiple of their albums, kind of probably like how you are with multiple of these Antestor albums. I mean, it's hard to explain it to somebody who doesn't feel in that way. It's something special about it that just allows you to heal your soul.
Hey, Geoff, I have a surprise for you.
Yeah.
It's 2005.
Oh, boy.
We're talking about The Forsaken.
Yep. Okay.
Oh,
Favorite
man.
album. No question.
Saw that
It's not
coming.
Close. Not close at all.
Sometimes I think I can predict when Geoff is going to have his favorite album. Sometimes I'm wrong. This week, it was pretty easy. The Forsaken kicks off with those melodic, operatic, we're off in the corner vocals. I feel like somebody once was recording an album called, what was that called, Dan? Watershed, and said, this is a great idea. And as soon as the double bass kicks in, I said, this is Geoff's favorite. I know. I feel like this is one of those times when I just know. This is that line I said earlier about genre names being misused. This is one of those times where, is it really black metal? Or is it just really atmospheric death metal? The early records in Opeth's discography would tell me this is just melodic death metal. I don't care what the answer is, by the way, because this album is so fucking good.
I'm going to try to tackle that the best I can.
Hut 1, Hut 2, hike!
Hey, what, did you guys hear that? Is that the genre police outside? So, it's black metal. I'll answer that question for you right off the bat. This is not melodic death metal. This doesn't sound like At the Gates. This doesn't sound like Old In Flames. You know, it doesn't sound like what was that band that became terrible? Oh, I already said In Flames. Avatar. You know, like it doesn't sound like those bands. Is what I'm trying to say.
My freak show smells great, by the way.
Disgusting.
But
The Forsaken is black metal, but like, and I hate to use this term because we've used so many contradictory terms in this episode. This is like commercial black metal or mainstream sounding black metal. This is the kind of music that Demi Borgir was making whenever they, you know, got seen on MTV by people, you know, or even Cradle of Filth. I think it's a lot heavier than that. And these guys are clearly masters. What's interesting to me about The Forsaken is how positive it sounds overall in comparison to the entire rest of Antestor's discography.
Yes.
So like you almost have to think of it this way. The Return of the Black Death was like the night before, and The Forsaken is when you wake up the next morning with a fresh perspective. Because like in The Return of the Black Death, you're laying there dying in the snow. And then you actually wake up the next morning and
Reborn.
You suddenly have like a sled and an entire dog team, and you're like flying across that ice and the sun shining. It's still cold outside, you know, it's still intense, it's still in your face, but you're out to conquer it now.
This is like the second half of the movie Iron Will.
Yeah, you're about to go out and conquer what the source of the problem is, right? I mean, it's the devil, right? But like anyway, you're out to like to fix it, or you're feeling better. And it's not that this album isn't depressing. I mean, you've got songs like Betrayed, Via Dolorosa, The Crown I Carry, there, and As I Die, obviously. But like, I mean, it still has that sort of like sorrow metal feel. But this is a album where the step up in production cannot be ignored. This is literally, they've been this like really cool kind of underground gem. They don't sound as good as a band with a budget, you know, but they sound good. Their material's good. Their ideas are good. They're even beautiful. And then you get to The Forsaken, and like suddenly there's a budget, and there's multiple takes, and everything sounds as clear as crystal. Now, there's a lot of black metal purists out there that are going to say that's not good. No. You go back to what you guys were doing on The Return of the Black Death. That's real black metal. And then you tell them it's Christian black metal, and they stab you in the heart. But like, it is, this is purely how you want to look at it. If you want my personal opinion, I guess that's probably why you're listening to this. I think it's fantastic. I think this is a vision realized in a way that I think that the band was just incapable of before. You've got a different vocalist on this one. He actually used to sing for a band called, and I'm going to say this totally wrong, but here we go. It's Vakavandring.
I'm going to let you have it.
They have
Well done, sir.
They've got a 3-song demo that's really good that I would highly recommend you check out, because it gives a lot of perspective on The Forsaken. Because with this vocalist, he is obviously going to be capable of performing everything off of Return of the Black Death without a problem. And on this, I mean, it's one of the best vocalist kind of upgrades I've heard. His black metal screams are some of the best I've heard in the business. I love it. I even love the weird cleans he throws in, like in Rites of Death. Like it sounds so goofy, but it sounds so good. He's like transfer life into what's dead, the act of human playing God. Like it's and then of course that amazing guitar solo that plays afterwards. That's like really bouncy and happy and weird. And you like forget you're listening to Antestor for a second. It's so good. Old Times Cruelty. Buddy and I used to play that on a radio station just to freak people out late at night. We'd be like, yeah, guys, here's POD. Now here's Project 86. Now here's Old Times Cruelty by Antestor. You guys still awake? And then people would call and request it. Be like, dude, that was actually really good. I want to hear more stuff like that.
Well, the other thing I wanted to point out, and I actually liked the kind of the dichotomy of it, was the Anne-Marie Edvardsen, but however you want to say it. I really liked her vocals on this too.
Yes.
A lot. Like I was, this was like so chill. Like this is the type of music that I listen to at, at a campfire, not really a campfire, but a fire pit in my backyard, with a nice beer in hand and just kind of exhale out the week's troubles. That's what this album is for me. Like this was such an easy listen. 3 of their 4 albums for me are actually really, really easy listens. This one, no question, is going to stay in the rotation for me as somebody who hadn't listened to them before. This was, oh gosh, I can't believe how much I enjoyed it. In being pleasantly surprised like that, you kind of get jaded in this job, you listen to so much music, you go through so many different things. It's hard to be pleasantly surprised because you kind of expect everything that's coming your way. Nothing really surprises you anymore. And this was so good. And I think you're right. That hint of positivity that's mixed in with this, I think is what just made it turn the corner for me and really just made it that much more special. Is the fact that they took something that had been existing and it was the typical, formulaic approach. And they took it and they put a spin on it, and they kind of just said, you know what, this is how we envision it. This is how we think it should be, and it's great. And this is a must listen for anybody and everybody. Even the black metal elitists need to put their crowns of thorns aside and
the crowns they carry.
Yes, and listen to this, and they're going to say, okay, if I didn't know that this was a Christian band, I would like it, So it's even, I think if you it's one of those things like whenever you do like the blind taste test, you're always going to pick this one as compared to a lot of other stuff. Whether you know what it's about, it doesn't really matter. You hear it and you go, okay, that's the one I like. And that's what this album is for me.
I think emotionally it's super satisfying to hear this album because like the last time you heard this band, like it was in 1998, it was 7 years ago. And you got done with that one, and you're like, "Oh God, I hope those guys are okay," And then you don't hear from them again until 2005, and you're like, "Oh, you're alive, thank God," like cool. And they're fresh and they're heavy and they're out to prove to the world that this whole like Christian metal thing that everybody thinks is a joke is actually super legit and is something that has its own fan base, has its own following, and is able to stand toe-to-toe with some of the most popular bands in the genre. And I can't pass this up, the fact that Jan Axel Blomberg, a.k.a. Hellhammer, who played in Mayhem, played drums on this record. Well, he's a session musician. He didn't join the band, but
right.
To have that level of credibility.
You know why he did it too,
Go back to 1984 and tell that dude that he's going to play on a Christian black metal album.
You know why he did it, right?
Money?
No, it was a double barrel salute to the black metal scene.
That's fair.
He's like, I can do whatever I want to do. I don't have to play drums in every black metal band and only play drums in your quote unquote black metal bands. If I want to play drums for these guys, then I'm going to play drums for these guys. I don't care what you say. I don't care what you think.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's nothing much more metal than that.
No, I think it's and obviously the drumming is amazing. It sounds fantastic, and Before this record came out, they actually released an EP called Det Top Live, which has one of the same songs on it. But there is a song I would encourage everybody to listen to called Grief. Last Season. It's really, 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 really good off of that. So, just pull it up on YouTube. We'll link it, or I'll link it. I'll send Joe the link and he'll link it. And then you guys can listen to it. But yeah, it's such a great album, and honestly, like, really cemented these guys as the real deal as far as these bands go. We talked about X-Toll a while back and how great they were, and those are the guys that'll turn around and be like, "Oh no, you guys need to go listen to Antestor." They're like those guys are the real deal. And yeah, this record was obviously like got them more fans, I think, than they had ever had before combined.
Yeah, I will say this. The one other thing, since Anne-Marie Edvardson, it's making me want to go check out the Third and the Mortal. That was the band that she used to be in, and I have not listened to them. But that's how much I like her on this. Like, I'm actually going to actively pursue it and it not be related to the podcast. So I'm super curious to see what their discography is like, because I know she's on a couple of the albums. I think there's Painting on Glass and In This Room. I think she's on those 2 of the 4. So I definitely want to check it out.
2012, Omen.
So can this be my 1B?
It could be whatever you want, Geoff. You're allowed to like what you like.
Yeah, it's definitely my 1B. Yeah,
you're not allowed to not like things that I like, but you're allowed to like what you like.
Yeah, I like this album a lot.
Let's just keep the feeling going from the last record. Give it some more modern heavy metal feel, and then let's just see what happens. It sounds epic. It sounds fully realized, if you can fully realize a black metal sound. 4 albums, a few EPs, a couple demos, and an almost 20-year career at that point. I think they figured it out. Can we get 7 or 8 more of these, please? With the current timing, this is the year for a new album, please. Can I get my hopes up yet?
I mean, it's interesting to see how they went for the brutal on this one. They went for the throat. This is by far the heaviest Antestor album. And don't send me an email telling me about how, the Death Doom riffs on Martyrium and Return to the Black Death are technically heavier than the black metal riffs that are on the... I get what you're trying to say, but for the purpose of this episode, I'm going to say it's the heaviest Antestor album. Citation needed. But I think that it is very aggressive. That's certainly aggressive. They are really going for the throat on this one. And what it creates is kind of an interesting yin-yang with the Forsaken. I think both of these records complement each other really well. Whereas the Forsaken takes the more sort of melodic, kind of positive sounding thing. You get to Omen, and now we're at war.
Yeah, and I think that's probably why I like it. They do reflect upon each other quite nicely. The one thing that surprised me on this was I heard an EBO on this, and I was like, no way, I haven't heard an EBO in like 20 years. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. That's on here? That's awesome.
Hey, Geoff, there's an EBO on this album.
I know. I remember trying to play with one, and it was such a pain in the patootie. I didn't care for it. I wasn't patient enough. But yeah, I thought it was cool.
Yeah, I think this absolutely is insane. And it's funny too, because like if you ask them and you ask if this was a black metal record, they'd say no. They'd say black metal's dead. And that there's we're just extreme metal now. And I think that is actually kind of true here. I think primarily it's based in black metal. The death metal energy and some of the riffing is definitely here. And I think that's what they mean, is that it's kind of more of a blend of styles. I have to admit, as much as I like this record, and this is what keeps it from being like my absolute favorite, just is the fact that it doesn't always have the atmosphere that we've been used to having from the band. This is a more straight ahead, just brutal assault, which, don't get me wrong, this guy loves to be brutally assaulted. But I'm just used to this band kind of making me feel a specific way. And again, it's not that it's not in there. Like if you listen to the song "The Kindling," that's got that's got all your atmosphere right there. That's classic Antestor on that song.
Yeah, for me, All Towers Must Fall. I love that.
Oh my God,
that song.
So good, so good. It's all good. Go out and buy it. Expletive. It's just, if you're on the fence because of the Christian thing, just don't be.
Good music is good music.
Final thoughts on Antestor, Geoff.
A massive, pleasant surprise. Was not expecting it to be as good as it was, and I'm glad that it's as good as it was because it's going into my rotation. I mean, I don't say that lightly. So I wasn't expecting that at all. The fact that because I'm normally not a big black metal fan, I've made that known quite a few times on here. But they do a very good job of pulling it off. The Forsaken is 100% in the rotation for foreseeable future. So I really dig these guys. I hope they put out some more music. I don't know. They're not. I don't think they're officially disbanded or anything. They just take a very long time to put music out there. So I hope we get some more of it.
Dan, what about you?
All I got to say is it doesn't matter what album you pick or whichever one that you decide, is going to be your introduction to the band, but you need to just turn all the lights off, lay down on a couch, turn the air conditioning down to like 63 and just lay there with headphones on and listen to the album. And then you're going to get it. And it doesn't matter how much I try to convince you to get it or not. You're only going to get it by having an experience with it. So don't just listen to it, experience it.
I think Antestor is one of my favorite bands from 10 to 15 years ago. I say that because they were one of the best bands when everybody was still talking about genres, when everybody was still talking about black metal, unblack metal, what it means to be a Christian band. And if we change this word, it changes the meaning of everything. And all of a sudden it becomes okay to play really dark music. I really don't think any of that shit matters. I think Antestor is trying to create an atmosphere and create a feeling, and they do it better than most of their contemporaries. How many movies can you name from the 70s and the 80s when they did the mountain man trope and the snowstorm kicks in and it feels hopeless because everybody's faces are chapped and they've got these giant coats on that they skinned from the elk and they're just trying to survive. Then the fire goes out. That's what Antestor is trying to do to you. They're trying to put you in that mindset of, yeah, it does feel hopeless, but it's not, right? So I really do think everyone should be listening to Antestor, because if you haven't listened to a good black metal band, you might be discounting what the style actually is. And it's a feeling. It's not a genre or a tempo or a pace. It's a dark feeling in the presence of an otherwise light situation.
Joe, I now have to go watch Jeremiah Johnson because the description you gave about the 70s and 80s movies about mountain men and being stuck, that's the best one.
You're not going to watch Call of the Wild, Geoff?
Nope. Definitely going with Jeremiah Johnson. 100%. Love Robert Redford.
I'll stick with Shadow of the Wolf then.
There you go.
Dan, what's your album of the week?
Oh, man. I mean, I think this one's pretty easy. I gave it away already. But, yeah, 100%. It's Transylvanian Hunger by Darkthrone. I like listening to that album and then also listening to The Return of the Black Death by Antestor. So when I listened to one, I felt the need to listen to the other. Definitely two sides of two very different coins, but I still love it. Love all of it.
Nice.
Geoff, what about you?
It's a surprise for me because it's grown on me quite a bit. Torn Arteries by Carcass.
Oh, man. So good.
Oh, it's so good.
It's so good. Almost to the point where I'm like, you know what? Make it a veggie sandwich.
Before we all got sent home for a year and a half, one of my favorite bands reunited to go on tour. They got to play 2 gigs, and I feel a little bit cheated that I didn't get to see them live one more time. But maybe I'll get another chance a few years from now. My album of the week is The Grand Pecking Order by Oysterhead.
Nice.
I
was going to say, speaking of them, that's kind of how I feel about The Police, since we're going to, we're crossing drummers there.
Exactly.
Yep.
Take us out, DFT.
If you guys like this podcast and you'd like to give us some suggestions, some attaboys, critiques, or just have a general question or a suggestion of a band you want us to talk about on this podcast, You can send us an email at danandjoeshow@gmail.com. Note that it doesn't say and Geoff show, just Dan and Joe. We don't let Geoff read the email. You can reach out to us on Facebook at facebook.com/discography discussion. You can follow us on Twitter at discussmetal and also on Instagram at discussmetal. We have a Discord server that you can join. There'll be a link in the show notes that'll take you there where you can hang out with us all the time and fans of the show alike. We have a fun community there. And if you want to hang out with us once a month, you can absolutely do that by joining our Patreon. There will be a link in the show notes that'll take you to our Patreon. Anything you want to give helps. Do not feel obligated to do so, but we appreciate you if you do.
And on that note, this has been episode 246 of Discography Discussion. Thank you for listening. You can like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at discussmetal. Subscribe to our podcast everywhere you listen to podcasts, including Google Play, Apple Podcasts, and Stitcher. Visit discussmetal.com for all things discography discussion. And please send questions and comments to danandjoeshow@gmail.com. If you are not a patron, you can become one at patreon.com/discussmetal. We have some sweet perks.
Give me your money.
$1 a month gets you into that exclusive album review feed.
The truth walks by our side.